So welcome in, Jim.
Thank you.
So you're a candidate for Executive Council in District 2.
Correct.
2 years ago, you were running for State Senate. What interests you about this position?
Well, this position, in my estimation, is not necessarily a politician. And if you study my background, my experience, I have a strong business background. And part of that business was negotiating contracts. And one of the largest responsibilities of the Executive Council is reviewing contracts with state agencies. Now, I've seen various numbers, and I believe it currently is anything over $25,000. But I've also heard $10,000, so I don't know which one they're going by at this juncture. Now, I realize I wouldn't be in a position of negotiating contracts, but I would be in a position of reviewing contracts. And the principal purpose of that is also to ensure that that agency has budgeted the monies to cover that contract, so that we don't get into an overspending situation. So there's fiscal responsibility involved with that as well.
Well, that kind of leads into one of the other questions that we had, which is a lot of people who we've had in as candidates for Executive Council, they know what the job is, but it's hard to get a sense of whether they're really prepared to do the work in the weeds that it entails. You know, what you get as sitting councilors and past councilors have told us, you know, a stack like this every week of contracts and materials to go through, having that the sense of whether those are up to snuff and whether all the legalities are there, whether the money makes sense.
Right.
So one, if you tell us a little bit in your experience, what lends itself toward that part of the job?
Sure. Well, as I think you understand, even though I'm a pilot, I took the opportunity to shift that experience into sales and marketing of aircraft. And my first major assignment was for a company called de Havilland Aircraft of Canada. And I was based in London, and my territory was the Middle East for sales and marketing. We also had North Africa, Greece, and Turkey. And I spent about 4 years traveling throughout the Middle East. We had a couple of successful sales, and that was really just me cutting my teeth in the whole process. After that, I returned to the United States, and I was hired by a company called Saab Aircraft of Sweden, division of the Saab name, both in the military side and also commercial aviation. We were developing or actually marketing and sales of a new product called the Saab 340, which was designed as a 35-passenger airplane for the regional commuter airlines. And it was a whole new scope, if you will, because prior to that, the range of seating was up to 19 seats typically. And then you went beyond that, you were into the regular airlines. And so this was really a new concept. And it took several years before we saw our first success. My first success was a 2-aircraft deal for a small Eastern Airlines carrier down in the Caribbean. And that was worth about $12 to $15 million. But that relationship that I formed then went on to the main carrier, which was in Dallas, called Metro Airlines. And I ended up selling them 16 aircraft worth about $100 million. And I was involved in all of the negotiations leading up to that, along with lawyers and so on and so forth. So that's where my real experience started. And then I took that opportunity because they were a, quote, franchise American Eagle carrier. And I developed a relationship with American Airlines and American Eagle headquarters, which were in the process of buying up their carriers. And the objective, part of the objective, was for a commonality of fleet in the future. As a result, I was one of 4 manufacturers invited to make a proposal for 50 aircraft. And out of that 2-year process, it took 2 years to get through all the details, working with the pilots, the mechanics, contracts, finance, all of that process. We ended up selling 50 aircraft and 50 options, and it was worth $1 billion. So I've had a great range of experience in the sense of dollar values. Never forget the first delivery to American Eagle was in Sweden to the chairman, president, CEO of American Airlines. His name was Bob Crandall. And the person who delivered that airplane to him was the King of Sweden. And prior to that delivery ceremony, I was invited to meet the King, and he wanted to personally thank me for what I had done on behalf of their country, bringing employment, and certainly the revenue was noted as the largest commercial contract in the history of Sweden in 1989, up to 1989. Obviously, military contracts were larger, but as far as a single commercial contract, it was the largest in Sweden's history. So I didn't get there by not doing my due diligence. And I feel that's what I bring to the job as a counselor.
Okay. And so you mentioned starting out, it's not an outright political position.
In other words, we're not making laws. We're not
Right.
Proposing bills.
So,
and so on and so
if
forth.
somebody were to go to your website, votejimbeard.com, and look at your reasons for running,
Mhm.
you list opposing Common Core and wanting to foster local control in education, ensuring we don't have an income tax, moving the state toward more vocational training in education. As an executive counselor, how would you affect those issues? Those seem legislative.
Well, they are, but those are issues that are important to me. How I can affect it, I honestly can't tell you at this time, but those are issues that are have a bearing on why I'm running. To give you an example, I grew up in a family of teachers. My dad was a teacher. He was the head of industrial arts at Nadnock Regional High School when it first opened. And I saw the benefits of a school that offered a broad education in training of working with your hands, whether it be woodworking, whether it be metal shop, whether it be auto mechanics, drafting, printing. As an example, I've gone to reunions, and I've had classmates of mine come up to me and say to me, you know, your father helped save my life. He gave me the skills that I needed to make a living out there. And so part of what I'm saying is that we've had a shift in our education philosophy where we're promoting that every child should graduate from high school and go to college. And that's simply not the case. And are we, as a society, providing the skill sets for those that do not go to college? Are we offering the type of education that allows them to leave high school potentially going right into a skilled job, a trade job? I find that very important. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to have the same industrial arts that we had 25, 30 years ago, but we can be offering technical training or offering the skill sets that our employers around us would offer as far as jobs go.
Okay, but again, that seems like if that's what your passion is for changing in New Hampshire, wouldn't running again for the legislature or governor or some position other than
Not at this time.
executive council?
Not at this time. I'm just sharing with you a passion that I have. I'm not saying that I'll be able to affect change in this position. Is it wrong to have a passion for what you believe in?
I guess one question I would have is these particular passions, how would they inform your review of, say, contracts? So would you look at a contract from, say, the education department and say, well, that's in favor of Common Core, and so I'm against that, so no to the contract?
I don't think I have the right to say no to the contract per se. I have the right to review the contract.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but then you vote yea or nay.
Right.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get at how this would play out in your role as an executive counselor.
Well, obviously, I haven't experienced that yet. This would be a new experience. But I don't think that you find any of the executive councilors coming into that position with already having the experience of an executive council.
Sure, I'm just wondering whether these philosophical positions that are important to you,
Mm-hmm.
which you acknowledge are more legislative than ministerial, I guess, would be,
Mm-hmm.
or executive, I guess. So would they play a role in how you do the job of an executive counselor?
Well, obviously they would. You can't take that away from your thinking process and your beliefs. I think it's important that you bring the skill set of your life experience to the job.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the functions of the Executive Council can be said to sort of serve as a check on the governor or oversight.
Mhm.
You could end up, along with a GOP majority, with a Republican governor or with a Democratic governor. And, you know, in this kind of polarized partisan age, do you see that checking function, that oversight function sort of working well? And how kind of do you think about that role of the council?
Yes, I think that my thought is that I believe I'm a reasoned person, and I bring reason to analysis, and that's how I would approach it, no matter what party I'm affiliated with. What's best for the constituents? That's what it comes down to. It really comes down to not being a Democrat, not being a Republican, a Libertarian, what have you. What's best for the constituents?
So part of it too is what's best for the overall state.
Mhm.
So how, the constituency for this district, as you know, is widely ranging and
Yes, it
convoluted,
is.
geographically at least.
Well, not only geographically, but also
Well, sure, and
the
people
whole
too. So
spectrum.
how do you reconcile balancing those important, the needs of the constituents versus the needs of the state? What's the give and take there?
Sure. I think that there is, throughout the state, there is a set of common standards. If you're from New Hampshire and you have a history in New Hampshire, we have a pretty strong value system. I know I do. growing up here. I know that, I was taught to respect your elders. I was taught to work hard, save your money. As a matter of fact, when I was a young boy living in Swansea, this would have been going into the sixth grade, I had a paper route delivering the Keene Sentinel. And I'll tell you what, that was, snow, wind, rain, whatever. That paper got delivered on my bicycle. So anyhow, values are very important. And certainly over time we're seeing a challenge, if that's the right term, to some of those values. But that's something that I believe in.
Another executive council function is overseeing the 10-year transportation plan. As you probably know, there's we seem to be adding red list bridges faster than we can repair them. That the latest 10-year plan doesn't seem to necessarily change that. I'm wondering if you think, there's anything the state needs to do differently to address its transportation needs.
Well, I don't know whether you followed the benefits of this year's budgeting and the fact that we're seeing more revenue as a result of the cut in the business taxes. And the governor has returned, I believe, up to $63 million back to the cities and towns this year for the purpose of upgrading roads and bridges, accelerating that 10-year plan, the red bridges. I know that as I've traveled around the district, I've seen an awful lot of new paving going on, new sidewalks. And so I believe that many of the cities and towns have taken benefit of receiving that additional revenue and accelerating plans that they had for that resurfacing and also bridge work. Again, I've seen a lot of bridges around my territory being worked on. I've gone through several detours as a result.
And as far as, on top of that, specifically on the council, is there anything you'd kind of work to do in the transportation space?
Until I get into the situation, the position, I really can't give you a qualified answer, if that's appropriate. I have to understand it better before I can comment.
You had mentioned earlier the contract threshold being either 10 or 25,000. We
I've heard it was at 25,
Yeah, it is.
and I'm hearing that they want to bring it back to 10, so that's why I'm...
They may, but it is at 25, was once 10.
Right.
But do you have any thoughts or sensibilities about whether that seems a good threshold? Would you give it any thought?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I
From a
mean, I
business
know at one
standpoint?
time it was 10,000, and they moved it up to 25,000. Why they want to bring it back considerably to 10, I honestly have not investigated that or asked the questions yet.
From a business sense, though, does it matter to you, do you think?
For me, it really doesn't matter unless there have been problems. If that's the justification for bringing it back to 10, then I'd like to understand why, in other words. Otherwise, I would be happy with the 25.
Another aspect of this job is to make decisions on nominees for notaries, for judgeships, for commission members.
Yeah.
Have you given thought to how you'll inform yourself on those decisions and what the key factors will be?
Sure. Again, I think in that situation, the best qualifications have to be studied. They have to be reviewed. The experience of that position, in other words, in the resume, and the actual work ethics of that individual. Those are the types of things that I would be looking at. And let me add one other thing. Where does that person stand in his or her community? What kind of a reputation do they have in their own body, if you will, of citizens around them? How are they viewed?
And in the case of judges, for instance, would you be looking at professional reputation and qualifications, or does judicial philosophy, ideology come into your assessment process?
Oh, it definitely would.
Yeah.
It definitely would.
And so what would those philosophies be that would be
Well,
of greater importance than others?
yes, yeah. Are they an individual that will uphold the Constitution in their analysis of whatever, whether it's a trial lawyer, lawyer judge, a civil judge, what have you? It really comes back to upholding our Constitution.
That aren't all, because I'm not in law, I'm not sure, aren't all judges and lawyers, don't they take an oath to do that? So.
They do,
at
but
least
they
in
don't
theory-
always perform.
At least in theory they would. Is that something that's debatable? I mean, either they're making decisions that violate the Constitution or they're not. Is that something you can determine, or does that kind of depend on your outlook?
Depends on my outlook, certainly, based on their record.
Okay.
Isn't that a measure of how we are all evaluated, based on our record?
Speaking of legal issues, the council recently considered a request for a pardon hearing from Gary Place, a convicted murderer. They denied that vote. I think it was 3-2 for a hearing. I was wondering if you sort of have any thoughts on that issue, on whether to kind of grant that individual a pardon hearing.
Well, there's no question that the crime that was committed was a heinous act. I do not believe that he would be eligible for parole. He's in prison for life for the crime that he committed. Now, what he can do is continue on his good behavior and work within the prison to help other prisoners that might be eligible for parole. He could be a good steward, a model prisoner for other prisoners.
And I guess in general, you know, with other such requests for pardon hearings, is there a particular way you would kind of approach those issues? Is it a case-by-case thing? Do you have kind of an overarching philosophy?
It always has to be a case by case. And the merits have to be evaluated.
Are there anything, particular things might be hard to kind of answer in the abstract, but particular sorts of things you'd be looking for in those cases?
Well, clearly, the history of how he has performed, he or she has performed as a prisoner for the crime that they committed. Do they show really positive signs for rehabilitation? And will they be a benefit to society if they were paroled?
Jim, one other thing that I was wondering about is there are set duties for the members of the council, but the council's own state website talks about advocating for and working for constituents and being a force. Would you see yourself trying to become a voice outside of the things that people typically say, well, the council's, they're doing the contracts, they're doing the transportation plan, they're overseeing appointments. Are there other areas in which you'd say, this is a role for me as a counselor?
Sure. And I'm going to give you a great example that was given to me, which I thought had great merit, and something that I would also embrace to do. One of the counselors, Joe Kenny, described to me a situation, I think it was last winter, which was not a good winter, it was a cold winter. In his district, up in Springfield, there was a fire that took out a lumber yard. And I don't think it destroyed it completely, but it certainly shut it down. And he was there the next day to meet with the owners and to offer up his help to ensure that the owners were aware of certain state agencies that could assist in bringing that lumber yard back into production as quickly as possible, and put those employees that had been put out of work back to work. So that made a big impact on me, and that's the type of constituency services that I would certainly embrace. When you have a disaster of a certain kind, whether it be for a manufacturing facility or whether it be for our personal residence, maybe a flood, whatever it might be, a disaster would be something that I would want to be in a position to assist.
Another example of a role sort of outside the council's official duties, we had your opponent, Councilor Valinsky, in here the other week, and he talked about a, quote, bully pulpit, he being one of the highest elected Democrats in the state, sort of using that prominence to go around advocating for education funding issues. There's also the sort of his issues with the liquor commission that he's been drawing publicity to. I'm wondering if you also see a role kind of advocating for some of these issues you're passionate about outside the council. Do you think that's sort of part of the position, or would that be more limited in your case?
It'd be more limited in my case.
Why is
working outside of the responsibilities of the council is not something that I would promote.
Why not?
Well, because I feel I have to establish myself within the council, obviously learning more about the requirements of the council, and I'd want to be comfortable in that role. Now, I can say, let's divert a little bit, and let's talk about the opioid situation. I could see that as becoming something that I would certainly want to be involved in. I'm a great advocate that we need to look more for prevention opportunities, getting that into our school systems, so that we're bringing the right focus to the right situation, much like we did, 25, 30 years ago with tobacco. We got that message into the school system, and it's made a tremendous impact. In order to do that, I'll just give you an example of what I did last weekend, and I'm going to do another one next week. Friday night, I was in Keene, and I did a ride-along with the police department. As it turns out, Friday night was pretty quiet. But we did answer or go to several domestic violence type situations. But we didn't encounter any overdose situations. But I was told that if I'd been with them the night before, they answered or were called to 3 overdose situations. And what I find extremely troubling is there were 3 overdoses. 2 of them were with the same person in one day. I find that very troubling. On Saturday night, I went over to Rochester and I did a ride-along with their police department. And I saw the neighborhoods where a lot of the drug dealing is going on. And I find in talking with the officers and the staff sergeant, in many ways their hands are tied as far as going after the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the dealers have figured out if they sit in Massachusetts and our little mules will come from New Hampshire down to Massachusetts, pick up the drugs, come back and sell them, the dealers aren't here in the state. On Thursday evening next week, I will be in Franklin, and I'm going to do a ride-along with the EMT services of the fire department. Again, these are all designed for me to get a better feel from those first responders what's going on in our communities. I can't say that I've got any answers yet, but I want to find answers.
So that would be as you mentioned, an issue where you'd be willing to step out of the usual role.
I hope it would
because
be.
It's a really important issue.
Right.
So typically, I guess as a council member, your influence in those matters would be restricted to if a contract for an agency comes before you, then you say, does this deal with prevention in the way I think it ought to, and
Right.
maybe try to influence it that way. But you do, as a high elected official on the council, have some prominence and some voice there. There is a kind of bully pulpit aspect to the position, so you would feel that's an area where you,
I would,
where you
because
might
like
just speak out on the need for
Sure.
that kind of thing.
Like I say, I feel that this is a crisis of insurmountable conditions. You know, New Hampshire is being and has been targeted for drugs. Let's face it. Until we step up to the bat and recognize that we have a very serious situation, we've got to find ways. I mean, in many cases, you can look at this as being, as seeing that it's generational. It goes along with our welfare system, generational. Poverty, generational. Is it all tied together? I don't know. But I suspect there's a linkage there. That's certainly what I was witnessing in Rochester the other night. These aren't middle-class people with no jobs hanging out of their balconies looking for entertainment on the street. That's what I witnessed. Every time the police came through, it was, you know, shaking their fists and well, enough on that.
Is there anything else that you would want readers or online viewers to know about your candidacy and how you're approaching the job?
I'm approaching it very seriously. As you've already recognized, it's a very large district, and I am really all over that district every week. There are different forums that I'm attending. There'll be 3 towards the 3rd week of October in 1 week. A lot of parades this summer. Hot parades. But you know, as I experienced when I ran for the Senate, I find it invigorating, and I find I get a good reception wherever I talk and wherever I go.
Well, we appreciate you coming here and talking to us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.